ask about that because I want to ask about how you create a tolerance for failure, right? Because I'm imagining at some point someone comes in and they say, Richard, you guys have got a couple great shows. You're becoming HBO again. I just want to say one word. Dragons. You should definitely do dragons. Yeah. This seems like the most unlikely pitch. But how do you create a culture where people feel like I can take this risk and I might fail and that's okay?
So another case study. So I was very nervous after I read the pilot script of Thrones because I was concerned that it was a little bit off-brand. We had never done sci-fi in any form. I was worried that it was out there. It was very expensive. The BBC had dropped out. They were going to co-finance the pilot, so it meant that the whole cost burden was on us. And Carolyn Strauss, who used to work at HBO, who was one of the producers of the show, called me up, and she just had an instinct that A, I was nervous about it, but B, that I was open enough to take a meeting, and she said, I need you to sit with David Benioff. And I said, okay, my pleasure. And Benioff came in and he confronted it head on and he said, look, I understand you're a little concerned. You think it's a little off brand. I said, I do. And he said, well, let me try to allay your concern. He said, number one, you're a political junkie, right? And I said, I am. And he said, all this is archetypal power. That's all this is, a story of power. Number two, you'll forget where you are in the first 15 minutes. You could be in 10th century England, you could be in 5th century, you'll just forget where you are. And then he looked at me and he said, I have wrestled with this for the last 2 years. I understand it, I feel it, I breathe it. There are very few things in my life that I would devote the next 8 to 10 years to. This is one of them, and I won't let you down. And it was over, and he had. Now, interestingly, he tells another story about he invoked his dad, who's a very well-known investment banker and who had been on politics, and he said, my father, like you, very involved with the Council on Foreign Relations, like you, very involved in politics, and he thought this was crazy, and then he read all the books and he became obsessed. So after last year's premiere in San Francisco, I said, Steve, his father's name is Steve Friedman. I said, you're one of the reasons that I became, he said, what are you talking about? And David was coming out of the aisle, and we had hundreds and hundreds of people in San Francisco at the premiere. And I said, well, when David said to me that you were hooked, that meant a lot to me. The father said, I read the first 30 pages of the book. And David said,
so a good story beats.
And David just turned to me and said, Dad, enough. I said, well, listen, thank God you parsed slightly on the story. But anyway, the fundamental point about Thrones is that Carolyn felt, this is not dead. Let's open up the conversation. And David felt, that he had a real story to tell. And frankly, my colleague Mike Lombardo had a similar conversation with Dan Weiss, his partner, that occurred in the gym where he saw Dan Weiss's passion. And so for us, it wasn't even that hard of a bet because we believed in them, and we couldn't have been more right.
That's interesting. And let me ask about the process a little bit, because I know one of the things that you've done is you've created the B team, right?
Team Bs, yeah.
You explicitly